There was something almost painfully ordinary about the lunchroom at that hour. The clatter of trays, the squeal of sneakers on linoleum, the rubbery macaroni that nobody in their right mind would actually eat. And yet, for Carly Beth Caldwell, even ordinary places had a way of turning treacherous. It started, as so many things did, with a simple question. Sabrina Mason pushed her fork through the bright yellow macaroni on her tray without actually committing to a bite, and asked what Carly Beth planned to be for Halloween. A witch, Carly Beth said, with the kind of firm conviction that immediately invited challenge. Sabrina's mouth dropped open. Carly Beth, a witch? Surely that was a joke, because everyone knew, that Carly Beth Caldwell was afraid of witches. Carly Beth's dark eyes flashed. She was not a scaredy cat, she insisted, even as the word seemed to hang in the air between them like a dare. Sabrina giggled. She couldn't help it, and reached across the table to save her friend from the truly reprehensible macaroni, while gently, mercilessly making her case. There was the ghost incident to consider. Just last week, at Sabrina's house, when the attic ceiling began to creak and footsteps shuffled overhead, Carly Beth's face had gone the color of chalk. She had screamed. It had only been Chuck and Steve coming down the stairs, but by then the damage was done. Carly Beth blushed and pouted and rolled her eyes, because what else could she do? She knew the list as well as anyone. Ghosts, snakes, bugs, loud noises, dark rooms, and yes, witches too, as Sabrina cheerfully added. It wasn't just one fear. It was a whole catalogue, and the people around her had long since memorized every entry. Even Sabrina, her best friend, found it difficult to resist the temptation. Carly Beth complained about this with the quiet dignity of someone who has made this complaint before and expects it to go unheeded. Looking at the two of them side by side, you might never guess they were the same age, that Carly Beth was actually a full month older than her friend. Carly Beth was 11, but looked younger, round-faced and small, with straight brown hair and a stub of a nose she privately despised and wished would grow longer. Sabrina was tall, dark, and composed, with a black ponytail and enormous eyes that made people assume she was 12 or 13 life. It seemed had distributed its gifts with a certain casual unfairness. Sabrina apologized sincerely, squeezing Carly Beth's wrist across the table, and offered tortilla chips as a peace offering. Carly Beth accepted both, and softened slightly. Maybe she wouldn't be a witch after all, she mused. Maybe she would be something worse. Something with hanging eyeballs and green slime dripping down her face. Something so genuinely horrible that she would be the one doing the scaring for once. She never got to finish the thought. A lunch tray hit the floor with a crash that split the air like a thunderclap, and Carly Beth screamed before she even knew what she was screaming at. The whole lunchroom watched Gabe Moser drop to his knees and scrape his lunch off the floor to a round of applause. Carly Beth hunched low in her seat, humiliated, willing her heart beat back to something reasonable. It had almost worked. Her breathing was almost normal again, and then a strong hand seized her by the shoulder from behind, and Carly Beth's shriek rang through the entire room, raw, involuntary, and absolutely impossible to take back. She heard laughter first, then a hand clamped down on her shoulder, and the whole lunchroom seemed to explode around her. Carly Beth whipped around to find her friend Steve Boswell standing right behind her, wearing that familiar mischievous grin. "Gotcha," he said, releasing her shoulder, like it was nothing. Steve swung himself into the chair beside Carly Beth, straddling its back with the casual ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. His best friend, Chuck Green, slammed his book bag onto the table and dropped down next to Sabrina. The two boys could have passed for brothers signed, both tall and thin, both hiding straight brown hair under baseball caps, both sporting the same dark eyes and the same goofy, irrepressible grins. They even dressed alike, in faded jeans and dark long-sleeved shirts, and both of them absolutely lived to scare Carly Beth. They spent hours dreaming up new ways to make her jump and shriek. She had vowed every single time that she would never try fall for one of their stupid tricks again. But so far, they had won every round. She always threatened to pay them back, but in all the years they had been friends, she had never quite managed to think of something good enough. Steve held out a crinkled hunk of aluminum foil. "Want a sandwich?" "I don't want it." Carly Beth sniffed it suspiciously. She was starving after all. "Oft-twined, is it?" "For turkey, my mum forgot the mayo, too dry." "Here," Steve said, handing it over cheerfully. "Sure, thanks." "Oh, sure." She took it, peeled back the foil, and sank her teeth into a big, grateful bite. That was when she noticed Steve and Chuck staring at her. Big grins, unblinking eyes. The kind of look that meant something had already gone terribly wrong. Something tasted funny, sticky, sour. Carly Beth stopped chewing. Chuck and Steve erupted into laughter. Sabrina looked confused. With a disgusted groan, Carly Beth spat the chewed mouthful into a napkin and slowly pulled the bread apart. And there it was, a big brown worm coiled right on top of the turkey. Oh, she covered her face with her hands as the entire lunchroom seemed to collapse into cruel, ringing laughter. "I ate a worm. I'm going to be sick." She jumped to her feet, glaring furiously at Steve. "How could you? It isn't funny. It's spooky. It's spooky." "It isn't a real worm," Chuck said, barely able to get the words out through his laughter. Steve was already too far gone to speak. Carly Beth stared down at it, a wave of nausea surging up from her stomach. Kids all through the vast room were whispering and pointing at her. "It isn't real. Pick it up," Thuzy Chuck urged, grinning. Carly Beth hesitated, then reached down with two reluctant fingers and picked the brown worm from the sandwich. It felt warm, sticky. Gotcha again." And Chuck howled. It was real. A real worm with a horrified cry. Carly Beth hurled it straight at Chuck and leapt away from the table, sending her chair clattering loudly against the hard floor. She clapped her hand over her mouth and ran, gagging, for the lunchroom doors. "I can still taste it," she thought wildly as she ran. "I can still taste the worm in my mouth." The cruel laughter chased her all the way across the hall as she burst through the double doors and hurtled toward the girls' room. And burning beneath the humiliation and the nausea was something sharper, something that wouldn't go away nearly as easily as the taste of that worm. "I'll pay them back for this," Carly Beth thought bitterly. "I'll pay them back. I really will." After school, Carly Beth hurried through the halls without talking to anyone. She could hear the kids laughing and whispering, and she knew something. She just knew whooshy. They were laughing at her. Word had spread all over Walnut Avenue Middle School that Carly Beth Caldwell had eaten a worm at lunch. Carly Beth, the scaredy cat. Carly Beth, who was frightened of her own shadow. Carly Beth, who was so impossibly easy to trick. It was Chuck and Steve who had done it, sneaked a real worm, a fat brown worm, right into her sandwich, and Carly Beth had taken a big, unsuspecting bite. She ran all the way home, 3 long blocks, her anger swelling with every pounding step. How could they do that to her? They were supposed to be her friends. Why did they think it was so funny to scare her? She burst through the front door, breathing hard, leaning against the banister to catch her breath. Her mother hurried out from the kitchen, bright-eyed and energetic, as always, Tondi a tall, chubby woman with thick coppery curls and lively green eyes, wearing a paint-stained grey sweatshirt over black lycra tights. She brushed a hand affectionately through Carly Beth's straight brown hair and murmured the thing she always said. "Do you get the straight hair?" They didn't look like mother and daughter at all. Mrs. Caldwell could sense something was wrong. But Carly Beth didn't feel like explaining that she had become the laughingstock of her entire school. When her mother suggested they talk, Carly Beth shook her head. When her mother tugged her toward the living room, insisting she had something to show her, Carly Beth tried to hang back thudding, but it was always impossible to argue with her mother. The woman was like a hurricane, sweeping everything in her direction. "Look," Mrs. Caldwell declared, gesturing triumphantly toward the mantelpiece. Carly Beth followed her mother's gaze and cried out in surprise. There, sitting on the mantel, was a head. Not just any head. It took her a few breathless moments to recognize the straight brown hair, the brown eyes, the short snip of a nose, the round cheeks. It was her, life-size. Her mother had just finished it that day in her art class at the museum. "Plaster of Paris," he explained, "hollow and delicate." She held it up so that Carly Beth was face to face, eye to eye with herself. "It's kind of creepy," Carly Beth muttered, unable to look away. Her mother's smile faded. She looked hurt. Carly Beth scrambled to reassure her sorry. It was good, it really was. It looked just like her Swanty, and blamed her strange reaction on a bad day. But even as she offered those careful words, she couldn't pull her gaze away from the sculpture. The brown eyes stared back at her. The brown hair shimmered in the afternoon sunlight coming through the window. And then, shoo, she was almost certain of it. She smiled at her. Carly Beth's mouth dropped open. She had seen it. She was sure she had seen it. But no, it was plaster of Paris. It had to be a trick of the light. She was already the fool of the day. She didn't need to go frightening herself over nothing. She forced her eyes away and managed a weak joke. "Two heads are better than one, right?" Her mother brightened immediately and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the duck costume was all ready and waiting on Carly Beth's bed. The duck costume swine, the one with all the feathers and everything, the one Carly Beth had admired at the mall and apparently asked her mother to make. Carly Beth's heart sank as she climbed the stairs. She didn't want to be cute this Halloween. She wanted to be scary. She had seen some genuinely terrifying masks in the window of a new party store near school, and one of them, she already knew, would have been perfect. But now she'd be waddling around in feathers while everyone quacked at her and made her feel small. It wasn't fair. Just because she had admired something in a store didn't mean she actually wanted to wear it. She hesitated outside her bedroom. The door was pulled shut, and she never closed that door. She pressed closer, listening. There was something on the other side, a sound. Someone breathing. The breathing grew louder. Carly Beth pressed her ear flat against the door. Something fi, or someone fied, was waiting in her room. There was only one way to find out. She reached for the handle, pulled the door open, and uttered a startled cry. The trouble started the moment Carly Beth stepped into the hallway and found herself pinned to the floor by an enormous white-feathered duck. Quack! The hideous cry split the air as the wild-eyed creature leapt at her, knocked her backwards, and held her down with all the considerable weight of an 8-year-old boy convinced he was being hilarious, because that, of course, was the truth of it. Beneath the white and yellow duck mask were the very familiar blue eyes of her little brother Noah, who had apparently decided that her Halloween costume was his personal property to raid whenever the mood struck him. "Did I scare you, Hi?" he asked, staring down at her through the mask. "Shine not a bit, Carly Beth lied." She demanded he get up. He refused. White feathers tickled her nose, and she sneezed. She accused him of always wanting everything that belonged to her, and he fired back the one observation that truly stung, that she got scared every time anyone said boo. It was a small, cruel truth, and they both knew it. Noah eventually climbed to his feet, flapped his feathery wings a few more times for dramatic effect, and had the nerve to ask if he could keep the costume. Carly Beth looked at her feather-covered bed and thought grimly that the costume might not survive until Halloween at all. When the phone rang, she was grateful for the escape. It was her best friend Sabrina, calling to remind her about the school science fair the next day. They had built a model of the solar system out of ping-pong balls, and it just needed painting. They made plans, and then the conversation drifted, as it inevitably did, to what had happened at lunch-diety to Chuck and Steve, and their endless, gleeful determination to frighten her. Sabrina, with the gentle bluntness of a true friend, offered an explanation. Carly Beth Didn't especially want to hear. I guess it's because you're so scareable. Carly Beth. Other people got scared too, Sabrina explained. They just didn't show it the way Carly Beth did. Her screams, her startled reactions, they were simply too satisfying for boys like Chuck and Steve to resist. Carly Beth listened, and then she made a declaration, quiet but fierce. She was not going to be scare-able anymore. She was not ever going to scream or get frightened again. She meant it. The science fair arrived, and so did the moment to prove herself. The auditorium stage was crowded and noisy with the ambitious efforts of an entire school's worth of young scientists. Martin Goodman had built a computer from scratch, because Martin Goodman was a genius and couldn't help himself. Mary Sue Chong had constructed an electronic robot arm. Brian Baldwin had glass bottles filled with something brown and grim that he claimed was toxic waste. Someone had mapped the chemical composition of the town's drinking water, and someone else had built a volcano that erupted magnificently on cue, sending red liquid gushing into the air, while the judges looked suitably impressed and the crowd cheered. Carly Beth and Sabrina stood beside their painted ping-pong ball solar system, which had survived the journey to school. Mostly intact sooty Pluto had acquired a slight dent, and Earth kept coming loose from its string and bouncing across the floor. Hunty Sabrina whispered nervously that their project was kind of boring. Just painted ping-pong balls on strings, really. Carly Beth insisted she liked it, that they had worked hard, that it was good. But her eyes were on the judges, who were making their way closer, clipboards in hand, smiles plastered across their faces. And then, from somewhere behind her on the stage, came a voice she recognized immediately. "Fi my tarantula." "Hey, my tarantula," got out. Steve, of course it was Steve. The auditorium erupted. Startled cries, laughter, the excited chaos of a crowd, suddenly unsure whether to run or watch. Carly Beth stood perfectly still and told herself with fierce and desperate certainty that she was not going to get scared. She was terrified of tarantulas. She knew it. Steve knew it. Everyone who had ever watched her at lunch knew it. This time would be different. This time she would be still. She would be quiet. She would prove them all wrong. She repeated it to herself like a prayer. "I'm not going to get scared. I'm not going to get scared." And then something pinched the back of her leg, sharp and spiny, its pincers digging into her skin, and Carly Beth let out a scream, so shrill, so piercing, so completely and utterly herself, that it rang through the entire auditorium, and answered, once and for all, the question she had so desperately wanted to settle. Carly Beth screamed and knocked over the entire solar system. She kicked her leg wildly, desperate to fling off what she was certain was a tarantula, sending ping-pong ball planets bouncing and skittering across the floor in every direction. She screamed again, shrieking for someone to get it off her, her voice ragged with pure terror. Carly Beth too, stop. Sabrina pleaded. "You're okay. You're okay." It took a long, agonizing moment before Carly Beth became aware of something awful, something almost worse than the spider itself. Everyone was laughing, her heart hammering against her ribs. She spun around and found Steve down on his hands and knees right behind her, grinning up at her with that infuriating grin of his. He made a slow, deliberate pinching motion with his thumb and finger. "Gotcha again," he said. There was no tarantula. There had never been a tarantula. Steve had simply pinched her leg. Carly Beth raised her head and saw it all kids laughing all over the stage, Mrs. Armbruster and Mr. Smythe laughing right along with them. The whole world, it seemed, was in on the joke, every single person except her. With a cry of pure, white-hot anger, she tried to kick Steve in the side, but he spun away easily, and she missed. Sabrina's voice floated toward her, asking for help picking up the scattered planets. But Sabrina sounded impossibly far away. All Carly Beth could truly hear was the furious pounding of her own heart and the laughter closing in around her from every direction. Steve had climbed to his feet now, and he and Chuck stood side by side, grinning and slapping each other, high-fives like they had just won something. Carly Beth didn't stay to watch. She spun away, leaped off the stage, and ran fleeing up the dark auditorium aisle as fast as her legs would carry her. "I'm going to pay Steve and Chuck back," she vowed, her sneakers thudding hard against the concrete. With every furious step, "I'm going to scare them, really scare them." The only question burning in the darkness ahead of her was the one she couldn't yet answer. How? Halloween had arrived, and Carly Beth Caldwell was already losing the battle. She cradled the phone against her shoulder, making plans with Sabrina to meet at 7:30 Thune. The earlier the better, Sabrina insisted, if they wanted to maximize their candy haul. But the conversation quickly turned sour when Sabrina brought up Steve. Yes, he had called. Yes, he had apologized. And no, Carly Beth was not impressed. He had already made her look like a complete jerk in front of the entire school. What good was sorry after that? Sabrina, ever the voice of uncomfortable reason, suggested it was actually kind of funny. Carly Beth did not agree. She did not have to agree about anything. When Sabrina asked about her costume, Carly Beth kept it mysterious. "It's a surprise," she said, and hung up. Then she turned and stared miserably at the feathery duck costume rolled up in the corner of her room. "It'll be a surprise to me, too," she thought. Her real plan had been a good one. After school, she was going to march straight to the new party store and pick out the ugliest, most disgusting, most terrifying mask they had. Something that would make people scream. Something that would make Steve regret every dirty trick he had ever pulled. But her mother had intercepted her, dragged her home, and left her watching her little brother, Noah, for hours. Mrs. Caldwell hadn't walked through the door until 5:15. Now it was nearly 5:45, and Carly Beth stood staring at her $30, her entire life savings stuffed into her wallet, wondering if she had any chance at all. Maybe the store stayed open late on Halloween. It was worth a try. She grabbed her coat and bolted out the front door into the cold, damp night. The air bit at her skin as she struggled to zip her jacket and jog at the same time. The neighborhood she had known her entire life looked different tonight, unsettling in a way she couldn't quite name. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed orange in windows. Paper skeletons dangled across a front porch. The wind howled through bare trees, shaking the skeletal branches overhead like rattling, bony arms. A car rolled silently past, its headlights sending a wash of pale light sliding across the wet sidewalk, like a ghost skimming the ground. Carly Beth shivered and ran a little faster. Then she saw it, Hybe, the old carpenter mansion, looming on the other side of the street over its dark, weed-tangled lawn. Everyone knew that place was haunted, that people had been murdered inside it 100 years ago. Once, when she was Noah's age, Steve and Chuck and a pack of other kids had dared each other to walk up and knock on its door. Carly Beth had turned and run home instead. She never did find out if any of them were brave enough to actually do it. Tonight, hurrying past the old house, she felt that same chill crawl up the back of her neck. The whole neighborhood felt heavy, weighted down with something she couldn't see. It wasn't just the wet gleam left behind by the rain thorn it. It was a deeper darkness, the eerie glow of grinning pumpkins, the silent, breathless feeling of Halloween hanging in the air like something just about to break loose. She forced herself to look ahead, turned the corner, and there it was, Simeby the little party store, its front window blazing with light. 2 rows of masks stared back out at the street. Gorilla masks, monster masks, a blue-haired alien. Pretty scary stuff, and that was just the window display. Surely they had even worse ones inside. She jogged across the street the moment a truck rumbled past, crossed her fingers, and reached for the door. The knob didn't move. She tried again. She tried pulling. She tried pushing. The door held firm, cold and indifferent in her hands. The store was closed. She was too late. Carly Beth pressed her face against the cold glass and stared into the darkened mask shop, her heart sinking a little more with every second. The walls beyond the window were covered in faces, hollow, grinning, leering faces, funny, and they all seemed to be laughing at her, laughing because she was too late, because the store was closed, and because tomorrow night she was going to have to waddle through the neighborhood as a stupid duck while Steve and Chuck laughed themselves sick. Then a dark shadow moved across the glass, and she lurched back with a gasp. It took her a moment to understand what she was seeing. A man in a black suit stood on the other side, staring out at her with an expression of cold surprise. He had shiny black hair parted precisely in the middle and slicked flat against his skull, and a pencil-thin mustache that sat beneath a very unreadable face. Carly Beth shouted through the glass, asking if he was closed. He gestured that he couldn't hear her, then cracked the door open an inch. "Can I help you, Archie?" he asked, his voice clipped and unhelpful. She told him, in the most determined voice she could manage, that she really would like to buy a mask. His tiny black eyes studied her face, as if weighing whether she was worth the trouble. Something about those eyes made her stomach tighten. They glowed like two burning coals. But after a long moment, he simply said, "Shall come in, Heidi," and stepped aside. As she crossed the threshold, she noticed the black cape draped over his shoulders. A Halloween costume, she told herself firmly. She was sure he didn't wear it all the time. She had to be sure. He closed the door behind her, and the outside world vanished. She turned her attention to the masks covering both walls and tried to focus. The man pointed out his remaining inventory with detached efficiency. "A gorilla mask," he said, "with real hair sign, very popular." Carly Beth stared up at it. Too ordinary, not scary enough. What about the yellowish one with the pointy ears? Some sort of Star Trek character. She shook her head. She needed something really scary. A strange smile formed beneath the man's thin mustache, and his burning eyes seemed to reach into her thoughts. "I look around," he said, sweeping his hand across the room. "Everything I have left in stock is up on the walls." She looked. A pig mask with long, ugly tusks and blood trickling from the snout caught her eye. Pretty good, but not quite right. A hairy werewolf with white, pointy fangs hung beside it, too ordinary. She moved past a green Frankenstein mask, a Freddy Krueger mask that came with a hand bristling with long silvery blades for fingers, and an E.T. mask. None of them were right. None of them were the kind of thing that would make Steve and Chuck die of fright, which was precisely and completely the point. The man drifted behind the narrow counter and began turning a key in the cash register. He told her, softly but firmly, that she really did need to make a choice. They were closed, after all. She was about to apologize and explain when the phone rang. He snatched it up and turned his back to her, speaking low and private, his black cape swallowing him whole. Left to herself, Carly Beth drifted toward the back of the store. She passed a black hat mask with long yellow fangs, a vampire mask with bright red blood trailing from its lips, a grinning bald Uncle Fester. Not right, not right, not right. And then she stopped. At the very back of the store, a narrow door stood slightly open. Pale orange light leaked through the gap and spilled across the shadowy floor like something alive. Was there another room back there? More masks. She glanced toward the front. The man still had his back to her, still murmuring into the phone, still wrapped in his cape like a secret. Carly Beth reached out and gave the door a hesitant push. It swung open with a slow, mournful creak. The pale orange light washed over her, and she stepped inside Wendy and gasped. 24 empty eye sockets stared blindly at Carly Beth, and every last one of them made her breath catch in her throat. She gaped at the distorted, deformed faces, crowding 2 shelves in the dim back room shut in masks. She realized, though they were so ugly, so grotesque, so hideously real, that the word hardly seemed to cover it. She gripped the doorframe, reluctant to step inside. the orange light casting everything in a sickly glow as she studied each horrible face in turn. One mask had long, stringy yellow hair falling over a bulging green forehead, with a hairy black rat's head poking up from a knot in the hair, its eyes gleaming like two dark jewels. The mask beside it had a large nail driven through an eye-hole, thick, wet-looking blood pouring down the cheek. Another appeared to be rotting apart, chunks of decayed skin falling away to reveal grey bone underneath, while an enormous black beetle poked out from between green and yellow putrid teeth. Carly Beth's horror mixed with something else, excitement. She stepped into the room. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her feet. She moved closer. The masks seemed so terribly real, their skin appearing to be made of actual flesh rather than rubber or plastic, every grotesque detail rendered with horrifying precision. And that was exactly what she needed. These are perfect, she thought, her heart pounding. Just what I was looking for. She let herself imagine it, Steve and Chuck, out in the dark of night, one of these nightmarish faces, lurching toward them. She pictured herself screaming a blood-curdling scream and leaping from behind a tree. She saw their horrified expressions in her mind, saw them shrieking and running for their lives. Perfect. What a laugh. What a victory. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the shelves, her eyes settling on a mask on the lower shelf. It had a bulging bald head with putrid yellow-green skin. Its enormous sunken eyes were an eerie orange that seemed to glow from within. Its nose was broad and flat, smashed in like a skeleton's, and its dark-lipped mouth gaped wide to reveal jagged animal fangs. Carly Beth stared hard at the hideous thing. Reluctantly, she reached out and touched its broad forehead, and the mask cried out. Something lurked in that back room, something with orange glowing eyes and jagged fangs. And Carly Beth wanted it more than anything in the world. She had shrieked and jerked her hand back from the mask when a furious cry split the air, and for one dizzy, heart-hammering moment she had been certain the terrible thing on the shelf had screamed at her. But no. The black-caped store owner stood in the doorway, his dark eyes flashing, his mouth pulled down into a menacing frown. He took a step toward her, his cape brushing the frame, and Carly Beth backed away, straight into the display shelves. The hideous masks jiggled and quaked around her like living things. "I am sorry you saw these," he said in a low, threatening voice, stepping closer still. Her mind raced. What is he going to do to me? Then he spoke again, softly, and the answer deflated all that dread into something almost embarrassing. "I am sorry you saw these, because they are not for sale." Carly Beth breathed a loud sigh of relief. He hadn't meant to frighten her at all. She had been frightening herself. She stood and watched as he moved past her to tend to his masks, handling each one with an almost tender care, rebrushing their hair, dusting their bulging blood-covered foreheads as though they were precious things. "Not for sale? Why not?" she demanded, her voice coming out tiny and shrill, scary. The man replied simply, turning to smile at her. That answer, rather than deterring her, was precisely what she needed to hear. Too scary. It was perfect. She told him so. She pointed to the very mask she had touched in the open mouth, the terrifying jagged fangs, and told him she wanted that one. When he steered her toward a gorilla mask with a good price and a growling expression, she shook her head with her arms crossed defiantly. A gorilla mask wouldn't scare Steve and Chuck. Nothing ordinary would do. The man's expression shifted at those names. He studied her a moment, then repeated his warning. "It's too scary. I can't take the responsibility." But Carly Beth was no longer listening to warnings. She was already imagining Steve and Chuck's faces finally, their costumes probably something lame like blue-painted Smurfs, sign crumbling into wide-eyed, stumbling, fainting terror. Then they would never try to scare her again. She dug into her pocket and shoved 30 wadded dollars into the man's hand. He gave them back to her with the patience of someone who had already decided. This was not about money. He started toward the front of the store. She chased after him, pleading, begging, insisting she needed it tidy. She really needed it tidied, until at last he shut his eyes and the word "Twin, please" wore him down to nothing. He opened his eyes. He shook his head. He debated with himself in some silent, private argument. Then, with a long sigh, he tucked the money into his coat pocket, lifted the mask carefully from its shelf, straightened its pointed ears, and held it out to her. She snatched it from his hands before he could reconsider. It felt soft and surprisingly warm in her grip, warmer than rubber or plastic had any right to feel. He called after her, offering a bag, but Carly Beth was already out the door and across the street, running through the black, starless night, the wet pavement glistening under her feet, the mask clutched tightly to her side. This is going to be the best trick-or-treat night ever, she thought, because this is the night I get my revenge. She stopped beneath a streetlight long enough to hold the mask up in both hands, gripping it by its pointed ears. It grinned back at her 72 crooked rows of fangs, hanging over thick, rubbery lips, and she grinned right back. By the time she reached the bottom of her driveway, with the front windows of her house glowing warmly and the porch lights spilling white across the lawn, one thought had already taken hold. She had to test it. She had to see just how good it really was. And her brother Noah's grinning face rose immediately in her mind, the answer arriving before she had even finished asking the question. Noah, she thought gleefully, has really been asking for it. She hurried up the drive, the mask tucked under her arm, revenge already burning bright funny, and Noah had no idea what was coming for him. Carly Beth slipped through the front door like a ghost, tossing her coat to the floor and breathing in the warm, sweet scent of hot cider drifting from the kitchen. Mom always went all out for holidays, but tonight Carly Beth had her own celebration in mind, 21, that involved a certain little brother who never missed a chance to plant rubber snakes in her bed or drop bugs down her back while bragging about how much braver he was than she'd ever be. Noah, her guinea pig, she could hear his footsteps thumping around upstairs, probably wrestling himself into the cockroach costume he'd begged their mother to throw together at the last minute, shiny complete with pointy feelers and a hard shell for his bat. Carly Beth smiled to herself, gripping the mask with both hands. This should send that cockroach scampering under the sink. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the crash of heavy metal music pouring out from under his door, and then she did it. She raised the mask carefully over her head and slowly pulled it down. It was warmer inside than she expected, tighter too, the rubber pressed close against her face, and a sour, stale smell twined, like damp newspapers rotting away in some forgotten attic, crept into her nose. She tried to ignore it, smoothing the bulging bald head down and tugging the neck into place until she could peer out through the eye holes. She hadn't thought to stop at a mirror first, but it didn't matter. She could feel that it was something terrible. The climb up the stairs was slow and awkward. The eye holes gave her a strange, narrow view of the world, and she gripped the banister with both hands, taking it one step at a time. By the time she reached the landing, the heavy metal song had crashed to a stop. She crept down the hall and edged her head around Noah's door. There he was, standing in front of his mirror, adjusting his cockroach feelers with great seriousness, totally unaware. "By North, I'm coming for you." The voice that came out of her stopped her cold. It was deep, gruff, a low, rumbling growl that didn't belong to her at all. Noah spun around. Even through the layers of bug makeup, the color drained clean out of his face. She lunged into the room with her arms outstretched. "Soon, Noah Farmer, I've got you." "No, sigh, please," he cried, stumbling backward toward his bed. His feelers quivered with his whole trembling body. "Who are you? How did you get in?" Why, he didn't recognize her, not even a flicker. He was terrified, Sandy genuinely, completely terrified, and Carly Beth felt a wild rush of glee. The hideous face, The deep evil rumble of that impossible voice. Whatever it was, the mask was an absolute, devastating success. "I've got you," she screamed, marveling at how monstrous she sounded, even to herself. "Hi, Mom, help!" Noah wailed, pressing himself against the bed frame, his whole body shaking. Carly Beth burst out laughing, a deep, rolling, unfamiliar laugh. "It's me, stupid, what a yellow-bellied scaredy." Cat Noah froze, staring hard at her. She gestured to her jeans, her sweater. "Don't you recognize me? It's me, you idiot." Harsher. He gaped at her, still shaken. "I didn't sound like you," he muttered, studying the mask with wide eyes. "I thought Fruity, your face twee. That mask tweedy. It really scared me." Still buzzing with victory, Carly Beth reached up and grabbed the bottom of the mask, ready to pull it off and let the moment land. It didn't move. She tugged harder, then grabbed at the pointed ears and pulled with both hands. Nothing. She got hold of the very top of the head and wrenched with everything she had. The mask held fast, sealed, stuck to her face like a second skin. The warmth inside suddenly felt suffocating. Her breathing came fast and loud, echoing back at her through the flat nose. "Hey, Saunty, it won't come off," she cried, the gruff, alien voice spilling out of her panic. "The mask corny. It won't come off." Something was wrong with the mask. That was the terrifying thought gripping Carly Beth as she stood there, yanking at the hideous face with both hands, unable to pull it free. Her fingers clawed and tugged, but the rubbery skin seemed to have fused with her own. "Stop it!" Noah cried, his voice sharp with anger swined, though his wide eyes told a very different story. "Stop kidding around, Carly Beth. You're scaring me." But she wasn't kidding. That harsh, raspy voice that scraped out of her throat was proof enough of that. "I really can't get toody, this toozy, off," Toozy insisted. With tremendous effort, she managed to slip her fingers beneath the mask's rubbery neck, peeling it slowly away from her skin, until at last she wrenched it free and lifted it from her head. The cool air that rushed against her face felt like a blessing. She shook her damp hair loose and grinned, then tossed the mask playfully at her brother. "Fin-good mask, huh?" Noah let it bounce onto the bed before picking it up with obvious reluctance, poking a cautious finger against the ugly fangs. "Where'd you get it, Fawn?" he asked. She told him about the new party store, dabbing perspiration from her forehead. The thing had been like wearing a furnace on her face. Noah wanted to try it on. She told him no foolery. She was already late. Then she laughed, because the fear she'd seen flash across his face had been absolutely priceless. He didn't appreciate the reminder. He tossed the mask back at her with a frown and insisted he'd been pretending the whole time, putting on an act just for her benefit. "Oh yeah, right, Typhy Carly Beth," muttered, heading for the door and rolling the mask over her hand. But then Noah called after her with a question that made her stop cold in the doorway. That deep, rumbling voice, the voice that had crawled out of her when the mask was on Suvin. How had she done that? He said it was the scariest part of the whole thing, staring at the mask in her hand, as though it was something he wasn't entirely sure he should have touched. Carly Beth turned the question over in her mind. Her smile faltered, replaced by something more uncertain. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I really don't know." But by the time she reached her own room, the unease had dissolved back into pure, gleeful triumph. The mask had worked. Noah could deny being frightened all he wanted, but she had seen the truth written all over his face when she'd burst in on him, growling through that hideous disguise. He'd nearly jumped straight out of his cockroach costume. Chuck and Steve wouldn't stand a chance. She sat on the edge of her bed and checked the clock. A few minutes remained before she needed to be in front of Sabrina's house, where everyone would be gathering. A few minutes, Suvi. Just enough time to plot something truly spectacular. Simply jumping out at them wouldn't do. That was too predictable, too ordinary. Carly Beth wanted something that would burrow under their skin and live there, something they would never ever forget. She ran her fingers slowly over the mask's pointed ears, thinking, scheming, and then Shudi. All at once Tweeny, a perfect idea, bloomed in her mind. Carly Beth had a plan, and it was gloriously, deliciously wicked. She slipped the old broomstick from the closet, brushed off a thick ball of dust, and examined the long wooden pole with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows exactly what mischief they're about to make. Perfect. She crept into the living room on careful, silent feet, casting a glance toward the kitchen to make sure her mother was still occupied. Mrs. Caldwell believed, typing quite innocently, Sidey, that her daughter was going to spend Halloween waddling around the neighborhood in a duck costume. She had no idea what was really coming. Carly Beth lifted the plaster of Paris sculpture down from the mantel. Her mother had made it, shaped it with her own talented hands, and the resemblance was uncanny. It really does look just like me, Carly Beth thought, studying it with wide, admiring eyes. Mom is really talented. She placed the sculpted head carefully atop the broomstick, where it balanced with unsettling ease, and carried the whole eerie arrangement over to the hallway mirror. The sight that greeted her made a wide grin break across her face. It looks like I'm carrying my real head on a stick. Her eyes sparkled with pure, gleeful mischief. Then she pulled on the mask. The sour aroma rushed into her nostrils the moment it touched her face, and the heat of it wrapped around her like something alive. The mask tightened against her skin as she worked it down, and when she raised her eyes to the mirror, she nearly frightened herself. It's like a real face, she thought, unable to look away. Her own eyes seemed to belong to it, not peering out of eye holes, but existing within the thing itself. She worked the gruesome mouth up and down. It moved like a real mouth. She realized it didn't look like a mask at all. It looked like a gross, deformed face, bulging, twisted, magnificently horrible. She smoothed the swollen forehead down over her hair with both hands and stared at her reflection. Excellent. The word echoed in her mind like a victory cry. Excellent. She couldn't believe the man in the party store had tried to refuse selling it to her. It was the scariest, most hideously realistic mask she had ever seen, and tonight it was hers. I will be the terror of Maple Avenue, she decided. Kids will be having nightmares about me for weeks, especially Chuck and Steve. She thought of their smug, laughing faces, and felt a thrill run through her. Boo, she muttered to herself, pleased, when the gruff, unnatural voice returned from somewhere deep in the mask. I'm ready, I'm ready. She picked up the broomstick with her sculpted head perched on top, turned toward the front door, and took her first triumphant step into the night, steed only to be stopped cold by her mother's voice, drifting cheerfully from the kitchen. Carly Beth sighed up. I want to see how you look in that duck costume. Ah, Carly Beth's stomach dropped. Oh, she groaned aloud. Mom isn't going to like this. Carly Beth stood frozen in the doorway, her pulse hammering beneath the horrible mask as she heard her mother's footsteps closing in from the hallway. She had borrowed the sculpted head from the mantel without asking, switched out the cheerful duck costume her mother had lovingly made, and now the moment of reckoning had arrived. Mrs. Caldwell called out warmly, asking to see the costume, completely unaware of what she was about to find. Carly Beth's mind raced with guilt. She hadn't said a word about her change of plans because she hadn't wanted to hurt her mother's feelings. And now that gentle omission was about to blow up in her face. Her mother was going to see the missing sculpture. She was going to demand it back on the mantel, and she was going to ruin everything. Carly Beth called out in a stall, her voice strange and muffled and deep inside the mask, saying she was in a hurry and would see her later. She pulled open the front door, but her mother rounded the corner and came into full view, and Carly Beth felt the sinking certainty of being caught. Then, like a small miracle, the phone rang. The sound crashed and echoed inside the mask. Mrs. Caldwell stopped, turned back toward the kitchen, Muttering that it was probably Carly Beth's father calling from Chicago, she told her daughter to be careful and disappeared. Just like that, she was gone, saved by the bell. Carly Beth exhaled a long breath of relief, balanced the sculpted head on its broomstick, and hurried out into the night. She pulled the door shut behind her and jogged down the front yard into the cool October air. A pale half-moon had risen low over the bare trees, and fat brown leaves swirled around her ankles as she headed toward the sidewalk. The plan was to meet Chuck and Steve in front of Sabrina's house, and she could hardly wait. The night had that perfect Halloween feeling she loved so much. A house on the corner was strung with orange lights along the top of its stoop, two grinning pumpkin cutouts flanking the doorway, a cardboard skeleton propped at the end of the front walk like a bony sentry. Carly Beth felt a rush of pure joy. She loved Halloween, but as she crossed onto Sabrina's block, other Halloweens crept back into her memory, and the joy sharpened into something more like hunger. Her friends had always used this night against her. Last year, Steve had slipped a convincingly real rubber rat into her trick or treat bag. She had reached in, felt something soft and hairy, and pulled out the rat. The scream that tore out of her had scattered her candy all over the driveway. Chuck, Steve, and Sabrina had thought it was absolutely hilarious. They always thought it was hilarious. Scaring Carly Beth, making her shriek and flail and lose her composure, had become their favorite Halloween tradition. Well, not this year. This year, she was done being the one who screamed. She hurried along beneath the bare tree limbs, which shivered overhead as the half-moon slipped behind a heavy cloud, and the ground darkened beneath her feet. The head on the broomstick bounced and nearly slipped off, and she slowed her pace, shifting her grip. She glanced up at the sculpted face. In the darkness it looked terrifyingly real. The shadows that crawled over it as she walked beneath the bare branches made the eyes and mouth seem to shift, to move, to watch. She forced herself to look away. Laughter from across the street pulled her attention. A little cluster of trick-or-treaters was swarming a brightly lit porch. A ghost, a mutant ninja turtle, a Freddy Krueger, and a princess in a pink ball gown with a tinfoil crown. Two mothers stood watch at the foot of the driveway. Carly Beth watched them collect their candy, then continued to the end of the block and climbed Sabrina's front stoop, stepping into a white triangle of porch light. She could hear voices inside the house, Sabrina shouting something to her mother, a television murmuring from the living room. She adjusted her horrible mask with one free hand, straightening the gaping, fanged mouth. She checked that the sculpted head was balanced. She reached out to ring the doorbell, and then she stopped. Voices behind her. She spun and squinted into the darkness of the sidewalk. Two costumed boys were approaching, shoving each other playfully as they came. Chuck and Steve. A wild excitement surged through her. She leapt off the stoop and dropped into a crouch behind a low evergreen shrub, her heart hammering with anticipation. After all those years of screaming, after every rat in every trick or treat bag, after every cruel prank they had ever pulled on her, the moment had finally arrived. Get ready for a scare, she thought. This time, it was her turn. Carly Beth crouched behind the shrub, trembling with anticipation, gripping her broomstick like a weapon. Two boys were making their way up the driveway, jostling each other playfully, laughing in the dark. One wore a long overcoat and a wide-brimmed fedora, Indiana Jones style. She couldn't quite make out the other. It didn't matter. She was certain it was Chuck and Steve, and she was ready. The mask had grown hot against her face, as if feeding off her excitement. Her breath rattled noisily through his flat, ugly nose. She waited until the boys were nearly right in front of her, then leapt out, thrusting the broomstick high, so the severed head at its tip seemed to glare down at them. The boys shrieked. Their eyes went wide. One of them actually dropped to his knees on the driveway. And then something unexpected happened. A sound came out of Carly Beth, a deep, rumbling howl that didn't feel like her own. It started low, as if rising from somewhere far away inside her, then tore through the night air, raspy and raw, like the roar of something that had never been human. It frightened even her. "Nu!" one of the boys cried. "Who are you?" "Oh," the other yelled. "Thy leave us alone." That's when she heard the rapid crunch of footsteps over dead leaves, and a woman in a bulky down coat came charging up the driveway, voice shrill and furious. "Hey, what are you doing? Are you scaring my kids?" Carly Beth's stomach dropped. She looked more carefully at the two terrified boys, and the horrible truth landed like a stone. These weren't Chuck. These weren't Shuv. These were just two little trick-or-treaters, and their very angry mother had just arrived to make sure Carly Beth knew it. Normally, she would have apologized immediately. She would have explained the whole embarrassing mix-up, probably turned red, probably stammered. That was the Carly Beth everyone knew, Sudi, the one who flinched, who backed down, who said sorry, before she even understood what she was sorry for. But hidden behind that grotesque mask, still feeling the impossible howl echoing in her chest, Carly Beth didn't feel like apologizing. She felt something else entirely. She felt anger. Deep, prickling, irrational anger that she couldn't name or explain. "Find a way," she rasped, waving the broomstick. The mother's eyes narrowed. Her arms crossed. "What did you say?" "Find, I said go away." Carly Beth snarled, and the voice that came out was so low, so genuinely terrifying, that it startled even her. The woman demanded her name, demanded to know if she lived nearby. The clown-faced boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, begging to just move on, to get some candy, that they were wasting the whole night. But the mother stood her ground, arms folded tight, staring Carly Beth down. "Fwyn, go away. I'm warning you." Carly Beth growled. Her breathing had become something animal, low, noisy grunts escaping the mask in ragged bursts. Her face burned, her entire body shook, not with nervousness now, but with something far more dangerous. The anger wasn't fading. It was growing, swelling inside her chest like a fire finding more oxygen. She could feel it pushing against her ribs, filling her throat, consuming her thoughts. What is happening to me? She wondered, genuinely frightened of herself. But the wondering didn't stop it. The rage kept building, electric and wild, until one final chilling thought surfaced and crystallized with terrifying clarity in her mind. "I'm going to tear this woman apart." Something was wrong with Carly Beth, something deep and dark and growing worse by the minute. Furious thoughts tore through her mind like claws. "I'll chew her to bits. I'll tear her skin off her bones." The words weren't her size, or at least they hadn't used to be. She crouched low, muscles coiled, ready to pounce on the woman and her two boys. But before she could lunge, the boys grabbed their mother and pulled her away down the driveway. "Pie, she's crazy," one of them called back over his shoulder. "Yeah, crazy." The word roared through her skull, repeating, echoing, feeding itself. And the mask Fidey, that horrible, wonderful mask Fidey, grew hotter and tighter against her face. As if it were listening, she stood there panting, watching them go, fighting the urge to chase after them, to really frighten them. It was only a sharp cry from behind her that broke the spell. Sabrina stood on the front stoop, leaning against the storm door, mouth open in a wide O of shock. She was dressed as Catwoman Silver, and grey catsuit, silver mask, black hair pulled back tight, dark eyes squinting into the darkness. "Who's there?" she demanded. Oh, she demanded. "Don't you recognize me?" Carly Beth rasped, stepping closer. She could see the fright blooming in Sabrina's eyes. Sabrina gripped the door handle like a lifeline, hovering half inside and half out of her house. Carly Beth waved the broomstick with her mother's sculpted head mounted on top, offering it like a clue. Sabrina gasped and raised a hand to her mouth. "Carly Beth, Shuki, is that Hootie? Is that you?" Her eyes darted back and forth between the mask and the head on the pole. "Hi, Sabrina," Carly Beth growled. Sivey Death growled. It's me." Sabrina studied her for a long moment before declaring the mask excellent. Really excellent. Terrifyingly excellent. Carly Beth complimented the catsuit, and Sabrina, wide-eyed, turned her attention to the sculpted head perched on the broomstick. She said it looked so real that the eyes seemed to stare right through you. Carly Beth gave the stick a little shake, making the head nod, and told Sabrina her mother had made it in her art class. Sabrina shivered and admitted she had thought, just for a moment, that it was a real head. Then Sabrina delivered the news Carly Beth had been dreading. Chuck and Steve were running late. Steve had to take his little sister trick, or treating first before he could meet up with them. The disappointment hit Carly Beth like a stone dropped into still water, sending dark ripples through her chest. The whole point of tonight, sighed the entire reason she had endured this mask, these thoughts. This heat, sighed Edie, was to find those two boys and terrify them, to make them regret every prank they had ever pulled on her. Sabrina suggested they start without the boys and let them catch up. Carly Beth agreed, though the word came out flat and hollow. They set off down the block together, dead leaves swirling at their feet like small panicked creatures. The bare trees bent and shivered above the dark, sloping rooftops. A pale half-moon slid in and out of the clouds. Sabrina chattered non-stop Sina about the run in the first catsuit she'd bought, about the difficulty of finding a cat-eyed mask that looked just right. Carly Beth walked in silence beside her, gripping her candy bag in one hand and struggling to balance the head on its pole in the other, her mind circling the same dark question over and over. What if Chuck and Steve never caught up to them? What if this whole night amounted to nothing? Sabrina, never one to let a silence breathe, eventually turned her attention back to the mask. Where had Carly Beth bought it? Had her mother made this one too? Was it from that new party store? And then, before Carly Beth could answer anything, could she touch it? Carly Beth stopped obediently. Sabrina pressed her fingers against the cheek of the mask, Sondi, then jerked her hand back as if she touched a hot stove. It feels like skin. Carly Beth laughed. It was a laugh she had never heard come out of herself before, scornful, hollow, not quite her own. What is it made of? Sure, Sabrina demanded, wrinkling her nose. It isn't actually skin, is it? It must be some kind of rubber. But then why is it so warm? You must be sweating like a pig under there. A surge of rage exploded through Carly Beth so suddenly, so completely, that she had no time to fight it. She dropped the bag, she dropped the broomstick, and then, with an angry howl, ripped from somewhere far below her own thoughts and feelings, she grabbed Sabrina by the throat with both hands and began to choke her. Something was wrong with Carly Beth, and deep down she knew it. It started the moment she released Sabrina's throat. 1 second she had been gripping her best friend with a fury she couldn't explain, and the next she was laughing it off, calling it a joke, pointing to the grotesque mask on her face, as though that explained everything. Sabrina rubbed her neck and frowned, not entirely convinced. Carly Beth picked up her bag and broomstick, the plaster of Paris head bobbing above her on its pole, and moved quickly toward the nearest lighted house before too many questions could follow her. The questions followed her anyway. Why had she gotten so angry? Why had she grabbed Sabrina like that? She had no answer, only a growing unease that she buried beneath the noise and energy of the night. At the first house, 2 little blonde children opened the door with their mother standing behind them. The little boy asked Sabrina if she was a cat. Sabrina meowed and told him she was Catwoman, but it was Carly Beth who drew the real reaction. The little girl took one look at that horrible face and declared she didn't like it, that it was too scary, that it was scaring her. Their mother tried to reassure her, and that's when Carly Beth did something she had no intention of doing. She leaned into the doorway, thrust her grotesque mask right up close to the little girl's face, and snarled, "I'll eat you up. I'll eat you up," the child screamed and fled into the house. Her brother stared wide-eyed and frozen. The mother dropped candy bars into the girls' bags and murmured that Carly Beth shouldn't have done that her daughter had nightmares. Instead of apologizing, Carly Beth turned to the boy. "I'll eat you up too." She laughed a deep, unfamiliar laugh and jumped off the porch, sprinting across the front lawn while the mother called after her in protest. Sabrina caught up to her in the street. "Why'd you scare those kids like that?" she demanded. "The mask made me do it," Carly Beth replied. She meant it to sound like a joke. It didn't feel like one. She hung back at the next few houses, letting Sabrina lead. At one stop, a middle-aged man in a torn blue sweater played along and pretended to be frightened, then insisted both girls come inside to show their elderly mother the costumes. Carly Beth groaned but followed. The old woman in the wheelchair stared at them blankly. On the way out, each girl received a green apple. Carly Beth waited until they reached the sidewalk. Then she wound up and hurled the apple as hard as she could at the man's house. It hit the shingled wall with a loud, satisfying thunk. "I really hate getting apples on Halloween," she announced. "I especially green ones." Sabrina stared at her. "Carly Beth, I'm worried about you. You're not acting like yourself at all." "No," Carly Beth thought, her jaw tightening beneath the mask. "I'm not a pitiful, frightened little mouse tonight." She snatched the apple from Sabrina's bag without asking, wound up again, and flung it at the house. It clanged against the aluminum gutter. The man in the torn sweater poked his head out. "Hey, what's the big idea?" Foch and Carly Beth screamed. They bolted down the block at full speed, laughing breathlessly, not stopping until the house was far behind them. Sabrina grabbed Carly Beth's shoulders, gasping, and called her crazy. Carly Beth only grinned, but the laughter between them felt different now, at least on Carly Beth's end. It felt sharp, electric, charged with something that had no name. She suggested they split up to cover more ground. Sabrina reminded her, suspiciously, that Carly Beth didn't even like candy. But Carly Beth was already running toward the next house, her sculpted head swaying above her on its broomstick. "This is my night," she told herself. Mine. A strange hunger had settled over her, one she couldn't explain and didn't try to. By the time she reached the end of the block, her bag was growing heavy. The corner was very dark. The streetlight burned out, the moon tucked away behind thick clouds. She heard voices nearby, not Chuck and Steve, strangers. Two boys dressed as mummies, arguing about where to go next, their faces wrapped in pale gauze. Carly Beth pressed herself back into the darkness and waited. She felt the grin stretch across her face beneath the mask. Closer they came, closer, and then she burst from the shadows with an animal howl that split the night open. The boys gasped. One of them tried to shout, but his voice choked and died in his throat. The other dropped his candy bag, and as he bent to retrieve it, Carly Beth was already moving. She snatched the bag from his hand and ran Hoincum back. That's mine." Their voices cracked and shook with fear and disbelief behind her. She looked back once. They weren't chasing her. They were too frightened to move, huddled together on the corner, their shouts growing smaller with every step she took. Carly Beth stopped, dumped the stolen candy into her own bag, and threw the empty sack on the ground. Then she tilted her head back and laughed. Not the nervous, embarrassed laugh she had carried around her whole life. Something else entirely, a cruel laugh, a triumphant one, a laugh she had never heard come out of herself before. She felt powerful, she felt strong, she felt ready for more. "Come on, Chuck and Steve," she thought, eyes scanning the dark street ahead with a gleam that had nothing gentle in it. "It's your turn next." Carly Beth found them. After all that waiting, all that simmering anger, she finally spotted Chuck and Steve standing across the street in the yellow glow of someone's driveway, casually rifling through their trick or treat bags like they hadn't a care in the world. She slipped behind the wide trunk of an old tree and watched, heart hammering in her chest. Neither boy had put much effort into his costume. Chuck wore a red bandana around his head and a black mask over his eyes. Steve had smeared big dark smudges across his cheeks and forehead and thrown on an old tennis hat and a torn raincoat. Was he supposed to be a bum? Their bags looked heavy and full fun. They'd clearly been out for a while. Then Steve glanced up, right in her direction. Carly Beth yanked her head back behind the trunk. Had he seen her? She held her breath. "No, don't blow it now," she told herself fiercely. "You've waited so long for this moment. You've waited so long to pay them back for every scare, every humiliation." When the two boys headed up to the next porch, she made her move. Nearly tripping over the broomstick, she darted across the street and crouched low behind a hedge. When they came back down the drive, she would leap out. She would pounce on them. She would scare them to death. The hedge smelled piney and sweet, still damp from the morning's rain. Wind made the leaves tremble. There was a strange whistling sound, and it took her a moment to realize it was her own breathing. And then the doubts came crashing in. This isn't going to work, she thought, crouching lower. I am a complete jerk. Chuck and Steve aren't going to be scared by a stupid mask. I'm going to jump out, and they're going to laugh at me. As they always do, they'll say, "Hi, hi, Carly Beth, looking good." And then they'll tell everyone at school fine how she thought she was so scary, how they recognized her immediately, what a total jerk she was, and everyone would have a good laugh at her expense. Why did she ever think this would work? Crouched behind the trembling hedge, Carly Beth felt her anger swell twined at herself. At the two boys, her face burned hot inside the ugly mask. Her heart thudded loudly. Her rapid breaths whistled against that flat, grotesque nose. Then she heard it, the crunch of sneakers on gravel. Chuck and Steve were coming back down the driveway. Carly Beth tensed every muscle in her legs and prepared to spring. Okay, she thought, pulling in one long, shaking breath. Here goes. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. The two boys moved past the hedge, talking excitedly to each other. But to Carly Beth, their voices seemed low and far away, muffled beneath the pounding of her own pulse. She pulled herself up, stepped out from the hedge, and screamed at the top of her lungs. Even in the dim light, she could see their reactions with perfect clarity. Their eyes went wide. Their mouths dropped open. Their hands shot up above their heads. Steve cried out. Chuck grabbed the sleeve of Steve's coat. Carly Beth's scream echoed over the dark front lawn, the sound hovering in the air like something alive. Everything moved so slowly that Carly Beth could see Chuck's eyebrows quiver. She could see his chin tremble. She could see the fear shimmer in Steve's eyes as they traveled from her mask up to the head mounted on the broomstick. She waved the broomstick menacingly. Steve uttered a frightened whimper. Chuck gaped at Carly Beth, his frightened eyes locked on hers. "Carly Beth Thudy, is that you?" Or, he finally managed to choke out. Carly Beth uttered an animal growl, but didn't reply. "Who are you?" Steve demanded, his voice trembling. It's Carly Beth Thudy, I think." Chuck told him. "Sudim, sit you in there, Carly Beth?" Steve let out a tense laugh. "Fine, you scared us. Why, Carly Beth Seward, is it you?" Why, Chuck demanded again. Carly Beth waved the broomstick and pointed up to the head. "That's Carly Beth's head," she told them. Her voice had become a deep, throaty rasp that didn't quite sound like her own. "Fauna." Both boys gazed up at it uncertainly. "That's Carly Beth's head," she repeated slowly, waving it toward them. The painted eyes of the sculpted face appeared to glare down at them. "Why, poor Carly Beth didn't want to give up her head tonight, but I took it anyway." Both boys stared up at the head. Chuck continued to grip Steve's coat sleeve. Steve uttered another tense laugh and studied Carly Beth's mask, his expression shifting between amusement and unease. "Fine, you're Carly Beth, right? How you making that weird voice? Mind if I your friend, Carly Beth?" she growled, pointing up to the head on the broomstick. "That's all that's left of her." Chuck swallowed hard, his eyes trained on the bobbing head. Hand over your candy. Carly Beth snarled, surprised by the vicious tone that had crept into her own voice, a coldness she hadn't planned on. "Ha, ha," she cried. Hand it over. Now, or I'll put your heads on the stick." Both boys laughed, shrill giggles spilling out of them, but Carly Beth was not laughing. "I'm not joking," she roared, and her angry words cut their laughter short like a blade. "Carly Beth Shun, give us a break." Shuck muttered uncertainly, his eyes still narrowed with something that hadn't quite stopped being fear. "Whunya, really, Foory," Steve said softly. "Hind over your bags. Hind over your bags. Hind Carly Beth," insisted coldly, "or your heads will adorn my stick." She lowered the broomstick toward them, slow and deliberate, and as she lowered it, all three of them found themselves staring up at the dark-eyed face. All three of them studied the frozen features, the face that looked so terrifyingly real, that looked so unmistakably like Carly Beth Caldwell herself. A sudden breeze swirled around them, making the head bob on the stick, and then all three of them saw the eyes blink. Once, twice, the brown eyes blinked, and the lips on the head parted, making a dry scraping sound that stopped every heart on that dark lawn. Frozen in horror, Carly Beth stared up at the face alongside the two boys. All three of them watched the lips move. All three of them heard the dry, crackling sound rise from something that should not have been able to make any sound at all. All three of them saw the dark lips squeeze together, then part, pushing out words that were barely a whisper, barely even a breath. "Help me, help me, help me." The broomstick slipped from Carly Beth's fingers the instant the head spoke. It clattered to the ground beside Chuck, and the horrible thing rolled away beneath the hedge like a secret tucking itself out of sight. Steve's voice cracked through the night air right while it talked. Sidey and Chuck could only manage a low, broken whimper before both boys abandoned their candy bags entirely and ran, their sneakers hammering the sidewalk in blind, desperate retreat. And then the wind came for Carly Beth. It swirled around her like something alive, like something that recognized what she had just done and wanted to celebrate with her. Wild impulses crashed through her body. She wanted to throw her head back and howl at the sky. She wanted to tear off her coat and fly through the dark. She wanted to scramble up the nearest tree, launch herself onto a rooftop, and roar at the starless ink, black heavens above. But she stood frozen instead, letting the wind wrap around her, while the truth of what had just happened settled in her bones. The boys were gone. She had done it. She had scared them nearly to death, and she would never, not ever, forget the looks carved into their faces, study the horror, the disbelief, the raw fear that had blazed in their dark eyes, and she would never forget the feeling that burned inside her chest in return, the thrilling, intoxicating sweetness of revenge. There had been one strange moment, though 21 sliver of a second, where she herself had felt it. The fear. She had almost believed that the head on the stick had blinked, had stirred, had come somehow to terrible life. She had almost believed she'd seen its lips move in a silent, desperate plea. "Help me, heil me," almost. But of course that hadn't happened. Of course the lips hadn't moved. It was shadows, nothing more shadows, thrown down by the moon as it slipped in and out from behind the shifting black clouds. She told herself this firmly, and she believed it, and that was that. The broomstick, the head food, where were they now? She scanned the dark briefly, then let it go. It didn't matter. None of that mattered any more. They had served their purpose. She had won, and now she ran. She ran the way you run when something enormous has just broken loose inside you, wildly, blindly, without direction or care. She vaulted over shrubs and hedges, tore across dark front lawns, let the blustery wind carry her like she weighed nothing at all. The houses blurred past on both sides. She felt herself swirling with the gusts, rising above sidewalks, rushing through tall weeds, blown along like a helpless, joyful leaf that has finally let go of the branch. Past startled trick or treaters she flew, past glowing jack-o'-lanterns and rattling plastic skeletons. Her candy bag swung heavy in her grip, and she ran and ran and ran until her breath simply gave out. She stopped, chest heaving, eyes shut, waiting for her heart to stop slamming against her ribs, for the blood to stop roaring at her temples. Then a hand seized her shoulder from behind in rough, a sudden, and without warning. For one breathless moment, everything felt wonderfully normal again. Sabrina's hand on Carly Beth's shoulder had made her shriek, but the shriek dissolved quickly into relieved laughter. Her best friend had been searching for her for hours, wandering the Halloween streets, hunting down Steve and Chuck and Carly Beth, while everyone else had scattered like leaves in the wind. Sabrina scolded her for disappearing, adjusting her cat mask over her dark hair as she spoke, and for a little while the two of them were just two girls comparing notes on a Halloween night well spent. Sabrina had ripped her catsuit on a mailbox. Carly Beth had scared a few kids. The candy bags were heavy and satisfying. When Sabrina lifted Carly Beth's haul and peered inside with wide, admiring eyes, Carly Beth felt a small, private thrill. She had hit a lot of houses. She had done everything she wanted to do tonight. She laughed to herself at that thought, and the laugh carried a weight that only she understood. They walked back toward Sabrina's house against the wind, though Carly Beth felt none of the chill. Two girls in frilly dresses and blonde, mop-like wigs ran past them, and one slowed just long enough to catch sight of Carly Beth's mask, before uttering a soft gasp and hurrying away. Carly Beth barely noticed. Sabrina groaned through the whole walk, lamenting a Halloween spent searching instead of scaring. But when Carly Beth mentioned Steve and Chuck, her friend's expression shifted to pure disbelief. Those two boys, who had apparently planned all evening to sneak up behind Carly Beth and frighten her, had instead taken one look at her mask and run screaming into the dark like terrified rabbits. Carly Beth laughed, telling it. They both did. It was hard, Carly Beth pointed out with a grin, to sneak up behind someone when you were already running for your life. At Sabrina's house, Mrs. Mason greeted them at the door, noted the mask with a raised eyebrow, and delivered the annual warning about unwrapped candy before retreating to the den. The girls upended their bags onto the living room rug and began the sacred ritual of sorting through the loot. A big Milky Way for Sabrina, an enormous blue jawbreaker that Carly Beth immediately surrendered, claiming it at once cut her tongue to pieces. They bickered cheerfully over the pile, while the comfortable warmth of an ordinary Halloween settled around them, like a blanket. Then Sabrina tugged off her own mask, shook out her black hair, and sighed with relief. The mask had been hot. She looked across the candy pile at Carly Beth. "Don't you want to take yours off? You must be boiling inside it." Carly Beth had actually forgotten she was wearing a mask. She reached up with both hands and tugged at the ears. Pain shot through her. The mask didn't move. She grabbed it by the top of the head, then tried stretching it out from the cheeks, then pried at it from the neck. Every attempt answered with the same sharp, sickening resistance. Sabrina looked up from her sorting, watching with growing concern as Carly Beth's movements became more desperate and frantic. "What's wrong?" "What?" Sabrina asked. Carly Beth's voice came out shrill and frightened, stripped of all the confidence and triumph she had worn all evening. "Help me, please, help me. The mask corny. It won't come off." And just like that, the comfortable warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and deeply, horribly wrong. The question hanging over the candy-strewn rug and the cheerful Halloween night was one that no amount of laughter could answer. What happens when the most terrifying mask you have ever worn decides it no longer belongs on the outside? On her knees on the carpet, surrounded by her piles of Halloween candy, Sabrina glanced up at her friend with an expression caught somewhere between amusement and exasperation. "Carly Beth, stop clowning around, Sippy," she said. But Carly Beth wasn't clowning. Her voice had gone shrill with something that sounded very much like real panic. "I'm not," she insisted, her fingers scrabbling desperately at the edges of the mask. "Aren't you tired of scaring people tonight?" Sabrina demanded, picking up a clear plastic bag of candy corn and turning it over in her hands. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm serious," Carly Beth cried, tugging at the mask's ears, unable to get a proper grip on the horrible thing. Sabrina tossed the candy corn aside and climbed to her feet. Something in her friend's voice had changed. "You really can't get the mask off." Then Carly Beth pulled hard on the chin. "Shouch!" The cry that escaped her was genuine and raw. "I'd stuck to my skin or something. Help me." Why, Sabrina laughed, though the laugh had an uneasy edge to it now. "We're going to look pretty stupid if we have to call the fire department to get you out of your mask." Carly Beth did not find it funny. She gripped the top of the mask with both hands and pulled with everything she had. The mask didn't budge, not even a little. Sabrina's grin faded. She stepped closer, studying her friend with new, cautious eyes. "You're not goofing, Sonny, are you? You're really stuck?" Carly Beth nodded frantically. "Well, come on, Farman," she urged. She helped me pull it off. Sabrina grabbed the top of the mask and then recoiled slightly. "It's so warm," she exclaimed. "You must be suffocating in there." "I just pulled hard," Carly Beth wailed. Sabrina pulled. "Ouch, not so hard." Carly Beth cried out. "It really hurts." Fired out. "It really hurts." Sabrina tried again, more gently this time, moving her hands to the cheeks, but the mask refused to yield. "What's this thing made of?" Sabrina asked, staring intently, her voice dropping to something quieter and more unsettled. "It doesn't feel like rubber, it feels like skin." "I don't know what it's made of, and I don't care," Why, Carly Beth snapped. "I just want it off. Maybe we should cut it off with scissors." "Sign wreck the mask?" Sabrina asked. "I don't care," Why, Carly Beth exclaimed, tugging furiously. "I really don't. I just want out. If I don't get this thing off me, I'm going to freak out. I'm serious." Sabrina placed a steadying hand on her friend's shoulder. Okay, 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 one more try. Then we'll cut it off." She narrowed her eyes, thinking out loud. "If I slip my hands up through the neck, I can stretch it out and push it up." "Well, go ahead. Just hurry, Harley," Beth pleaded, but Sabrina didn't move. Her dark eyes went wide, and her mouth fell open. She uttered a soft, stunned gasp. "Sabrina, what's the matter?" Carly Beth demanded. Sabrina didn't reply. Instead, she ran her fingers slowly, carefully over Carly Beth's throat, her astonished expression frozen in place. She moved behind her friend and traced her fingers along the back of Carly Beth's neck. "What is it? What's the matter?" "Why," Carly Beth demanded shrilly. Sabrina ran a hand back through her black hair, her forehead creased in deep, troubled concentration. "Findy Beth Sahishi," she said finally, her voice trembling at the edges. "Findy, there's something very weird going on here." "What are you talking about?" "There's no bottom to the mask. Hi-ha." Carly Beth's hand shot up to her own neck, feeling around in frantic, disbelieving circles. "What do you mean?" "Why, there's no line." "Why," Sabrina told her, "there's no line between the mask and your skin. No place to slip my hand in." "Why, but that's crazy," Carly Beth cried, pushing at the flesh of her throat, searching desperately for the seam, the edge, the place where the terrible thing ended, and she began. "That's crazy, just crazy." Sabrina raised her hands to her face, her features tight with horror. "That's crazy. Crazy, crazy," Carly Beth repeated in a high, frightened voice. But as her trembling fingers explored her neck with growing desperation, she realized, fooded with a cold, sinking dread that settled deep into her bones, that her friend was right. There was no longer a bottom to the mask, no place where it ended, no opening between the mask and Carly Beth's skin. The mask had become her face. Carly Beth's legs were trembling as she crossed the front entryway to the mirror. Her hands still frantically searched her throat, clawing for the seam that had to be there, the line where the mask ended and her real skin began. She pressed her face close to the large rectangular wall mirror and searched her reflection with desperate eyes. "See no line," she cried. She cried. She tried. "See no mask line." Sabrina stood a few feet back, her expression deeply troubled. "I don't understand it," she muttered, staring into the glass. Then Carly Beth's breath caught in her chest like a stone. "Those aren't my eyes," she screamed. Sabrina stepped up beside her. "Try to calm down, Fire," she urged softly. "See your eyes. See your eyes." "Why, they're not mine. Not mine." Carly Beth wailed, past hearing any comfort. "Where are my eyes? Where am I? Where am I, Sabrina? This isn't me in here. Why, Carly Beth Thybury, please calm down," Sabrina begged, though her own voice came out choked and frightened. But there was no calming her now. Carly Beth stood gaping in open-mouthed horror at her own reflection, her hands pressed tightly against the grotesquely wrinkled cheeks of the mask, staring into those glowing, orange, utterly unfamiliar eyes. "It isn't me," she declared. "It isn't me." Sabrina reached out to take hold of her friend, but Carly Beth pulled sharply away. With a high-pitched wail sign, a cry of pure horror and despair then, she flung herself down the hallway, struggling with the lock on the front door, sobbing loudly. The storm door slammed behind her as she plunged back out into the darkness. "Carly Beth, Roddy, your coat. Come back. You forgot your coat." Sabrina's frantic voice chased her from the doorway, but Carly Beth was already gone. Her sneakers thudded hard over the frozen ground as she ran beneath the swaying trees, as if she could hide herself, as if she could keep her hideous face from being seen by the world. She reached the sidewalk, turned right, and kept running, with no destination in mind, driven only by the desperate need to get away from Sabrina, away from the mirror, and most of all away from herself, because that was the worst of it. The face that had stared back at her from the glass was not hers. Those were someone else's eyes looking out from inside her head. Only it wasn't her head anymore. It was an ugly green monster head that had somehow attached itself to hers, swallowed her whole, and refused to let go. She ran on, breathing noisily through the flat, ugly nose, lowering her smooth green head against the cold wind. Dark trees swayed black against the starless sky. Houses blurred past, their windows leaking warm orange light into the night. But no matter where she turned her gaze, she saw the mask, the puckered skin, the glowing orange eyes, the rows of jagged animal teeth. My face, my face. High-pitched screams snapped her back. She had run headlong into a group of trick-or-treaters, 6 or 7 of them, shoe-dealing, toward her in terror, screaming and pointing. On instinct, Carly Beth opened her mouth wide, baring the sharp fangs, and let out a deep, guttural animal growl. The screaming stopped, the children stared, frozen, trying to decide whether to be frightened or amused. "What are you supposed to be?" a girl in a red and white ruffled clown costume called out. "I'm supposed to be me, but I'm not," Carly Beth thought bitterly. She said nothing. Lowering her head, she turned away and started to run again. Behind her, she could hear them laughing now, nervous, relieved laughter, glad she was leaving. With a bitter sob, she turned the corner and kept running. Where am I going? What am I doing? Am I going to keep running forever? The questions roared through her mind until suddenly she stopped short. The party store had come into view, of course. The party store, the strange man in the cape. He would help her. He would know what to do. He would know how to get this mask off. A surge of hope pushed her forward into a jog. But as she drew closer, the hope dimmed as completely as the store window. Through the glass she could see that every light inside was out. The store was as dark as the night surrounding it. It was closed. There are moments when a person realizes, with cold and absolute certainty, that wishing something away simply will not work. This was one of those moments for Carly Beth. She stood pressed against the darkened storefront, her hot hands flat against the cool glass, her grotesque face staring back at her from the reflection, those glowing orange eyes. Her eyes now, weren't they? I burned back at her from the darkness. She squeezed them shut. Maybe it was all a bad dream. Maybe if she just opened them again, the nightmare would dissolve like smoke. She opened them. The horrible face was still there, staring darkly back. No, the word tore out of her, and she slammed her fists against the window, shaking with despair. The bitter questions came flooding in, relentless and cruel. Why hadn't she just worn her mother's duck costume? Why had she been so desperately, stubbornly determined to be the scariest creature to ever roam on Halloween? Why had she needed so badly to terrify Chuck and Steve? She swallowed hard against the terrible answer forming in her mind, because now she would scare people for the rest of her life. But then tawdry movement inside the store, a dark shadow rolling across the floor, the sound of footsteps, the door rattled open a few inches, and the store owner's face appeared in the gap. His narrow eyes studied her with an unsettling calm, as though he had been expecting exactly this. I stayed late, he said quietly. I expected to see you again. His stillness unnerved her more than any startled reaction would have. She sputtered and tugged desperately at the top of her head. I can't get it off. I know, he said. Nothing in his expression shifted. He pushed the door open and stepped back to let her in. She hesitated, then moved quickly into the warmth of the dark store. He clicked on a single light above the front counter, and she noticed he had changed funny. The dramatic cape was gone, replaced by plain black trousers and a white dress shirt. An ordinary man in a very unordinary situation. You knew I'd come back, Carly Beth demanded, her voice raspy and raw with anger and confusion, the voice the mask had given her. How did you know? Weiss? He shook his head slowly, frowning as he stared at the mask. I didn't want to sell it to you. You remember, don't you? I told you I didn't want to sell it to you. I remember, Froy, she snapped. She'll just help me take it off. Okay, help me. He stared hard at her, silent and heavy. Help me take it off, she shouted. I want you to take it off. He let out a long, sorrowful sigh, and then he said the words that landed like a stone dropping into still, black water. I can't tie it, he told her sadly. I can't take it off. I'm really sorry. And there it was, sorry, the door slamming, shut on every hope. Carly Beth had carried back to this store. The one person she believed could undo this terrible thing was standing before her, helpless, or so he said, because the real screaming question, now Swai, the one that would not let her go Shwai, was whether sorry was all he truly had to offer, or whether there was something more he wasn't yet telling her. The worst fear Carly Beth had ever known was no longer about Halloween pranks or cruel classmates. It was about her own face T-Dine, or rather, the face that was no longer hers to remove. What do you mean it can't be taken off? She shrieked at the store owner, her voice cracking with terror, but he didn't answer with words. He simply turned and walked toward the back of the store, motioning for her to follow. She followed him into the back room, her heart hammering against her ribs. When he clicked on the light, the two long shelves of hideous faces snapped into focus. Stein and every single one of them seemed to stare directly at her. She could see the bare spot on the shelf where her mask had stood. Except it wasn't a mask. That was the horror at the center of everything. I can't remove it, I hardly repeated, his voice soft, almost sad. Why not? She demanded, planting herself in his path. He lowered his voice to just above a whisper. Because it isn't a mask. The words hit her like a fist. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The rows of bulging, bloodshot, yellow and green eyes bore down on her from every angle, and she pressed her back against the wall just to keep herself upright. The unloved, somebody said quietly, gesturing to the gnarled, twisted faces on the shelves. He explained with a bitterness that had clearly lived in him for years. These were not masks at all. They were real faces. Faces he had created in his laboratory. Faces that had once been beautiful and alive. But something had gone wrong. When they were brought out of the lab, they changed. His experiments had failed him, and yet he could not abandon them. He kept them here, calling them the unloved, because no one would ever want them sidewin, until occasionally someone wandered into the back room, and one of his faces found a new home. Amonowoo. The sound that tore out of Carly Beth was barely human. Cindy more animal wail than scream. She stared at the open wounds and animal fangs lining the shelves. Monsters. All of them monsters. And now she was one of them. She lost all control. Her hands flew to her face, the green, distorted, ruined face, and she tore at it frantically, screaming for him to take it off, to rip it away, to end this nightmare right now. But even through the panic, some cold part of her already knew. Her fingers found no seam, no edge, no place to pull. "The face is your face now. Hide," he said without expression. And then, just when the darkness felt total, he threw her a single thread of light. "The face can be removed." She froze. Her hands dropped. She stared at him with wild, desperate eyes. He told her there was one way, Fundy, one way, only 20, and that he could not do it for her. But he would tell her how. There was a warning attached, delivered in the flattest, most terrible tone imaginable. If the face ever attached itself to her or anyone else again, it would be permanent, forever. Carly Beth grabbed hold of that fragile hope with everything she had left. "How do I get it off?" she begged, her new raspy voice trembling. "Tell me, please. Tell me how." Tell me how. And the store owner, surrounded by his rows of unloved faces, prepared to answer. The light flickered overhead, casting its pale glow across rows of bloated, distorted faces that stared down at Carly Beth without mercy. Monsters, she thought. A room full of monsters, waiting to come alive. And now she was one of them. Now she was a monster, too. The floorboards creaked as the store owner moved away from the display shelves and came up close to her. She didn't waste a single breath. "How do I get this off me?" "Hi," she pleaded. Show me, show me. Show me so I know." "It can only be removed once," Icy repeated softly. "And it can only be removed by a symbol of love." She stared at him, waiting, desperate for him to say more. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, pressing down on her like a physical weight. "I don't understand," sighed it. "I don't understand," Carly Beth stammered at last. "You've got to help me. I don't understand you. Tell me something that makes sense. Help me." "I can say no more," he said, lowering his head and wearily rubbing his eyelids with his fingers. "Fubot, what do you mean by a symbol of love?" she demanded. She grabbed the front of his shirt with both hands, her knuckles white with desperation. "What do you mean? What do you mean?" He made no attempt to remove her hands. "I can say no more," he whispered again. "I know," she shouted. "Wano, you have to help me. You have to. Help me." She could feel her rage explode inside her, feel herself burst completely out of control, and she couldn't stop it. Couldn't pull herself back from the edge. "I want my face back," she shrieked, pounding on his chest with both fists. "I want my face back. I want myself back." She was screaming at the top of her lungs, but she didn't care anymore. The store owner backed away, motioning frantically with both hands for her to quiet down. Then, suddenly, his eyes flew open wide to Fune, not with annoyance, but with raw, unmistakable fear. Carly Beth followed his gaze to the display shelves. Oh, a strangled cry of horror tore from her throat as she saw them fully. Every single face on the shelves had begun to move. Bulging eyes blinked open. Swollen tongues licked it dry. Cracked lips. Dark wounds began to pulsate with something terrifyingly like life. The heads were all bobbing, blinking, breathing, "What, Foodie, what is happening?" Carly Beth whispered, her voice trembling like a candle flame in a storm. "You've awakened them all." The store owner cried out, his expression just as horrified as hers. But Suvan Bedfordy nevers no time for answers. "Silverhorn," he screamed, giving her a hard shove toward the doorway. "Fudden," and with that single desperate word, the question that had haunted her Thwendy, what symbol of love could possibly save her now, hung in the flickering air, unanswered, as the faces of monsters twitched and stirred all around her. Carly Beth hesitated. She turned back to stare at the heads bobbing on the shelves. And that was when everything went terribly wrong. Fat, dark lips began to move, making wet, sucking sounds. Crooked fangs clicked up and down. Ugly, inhuman noses twitched and gasped air noisily. The heads, empty two long rows of them, throbbed to life, and the eyes, those blood-veined, bulging eyes, the green ones, the sickly yellow ones, the bright scarlet ones, the disgusting eyeballs hanging by threads, they were all fixed on her. "Aran, you've awakened them." The store owner screamed, his voice choked with fear. "Run, get away from here." She wanted to run. Every instinct told her to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her knees felt wobbly and weak, and she suddenly felt as if she weighed 1,000 pounds. The store owner kept screaming his frantic cry, but Carly Beth couldn't tear her eyes away from the throbbing, twitching heads. She gaped at the hideous scene, frozen in terror, feeling her legs turn to gel, feeling her breath catch in her throat. And as she watched, the heads rose up and floated into the air. The store owner's voice seemed far away now. The heads began to jabber in rumbling, deep voices, drowning out his frantic cries. They murmured excitedly, making only sounds, no words, like a chorus of frogs. Up, up they floated, as Carly Beth stared in silent horror. Then something broke through the paralysis. She turned. She forced her legs to move, and with a desperate burst of energy, she ran funny through the dimly lit front room of the store, her hands grabbing for the doorknob, pulling open the door. A second later, she was out on the sidewalk, running through the darkness. Her sneakers thudded loudly on the pavement, and she felt a shock of cold air against her hot face, her hot green face, her monster face. The monster face she still could not remove. She crossed the street and kept running, and then she heard it time be that deep, gurgling sound, that low murmur that seemed to be following her. She glanced back, and her blood turned to ice. The gruesome heads were flying after her, a ghoulish parade. They flew in single file, one long chain of throbbing, jabbering heads. Their eyes glowed brightly, as bright as car headlights, and every single one of them was trained on Carly Beth. Choked with fear, she stumbled over the curb. Her arms shot forward as she struggled to regain her balance. Her legs wanted to collapse, but she forced them to keep moving. Bent into the wind, she ran past dark houses and empty lots. It must be late, she realized. Very late, too late. The words flashed through her mind like a warning. Too late for me. The hideous, glowing heads flew after her, getting closer, closer. The rumbling of their animal murmurs grew louder until the frightening sound seemed to surround her entirely. The wind roared, gusting hard, as if deliberately pushing her back. I'm running through a dark nightmare, she thought. I may run forever. Too late for me? Or was it? Even through the nightmarish panic, an idea began to claw its way forward. As she ran, her arms thrashing the air in front of her, as if reaching for safety, her mind fought desperately for a solution, for an escape. Then she heard it 20, the store owner's words, echoing through the chaos. A symbol of love. That was what it would take to rid her of the monster mask that had become her own face. But would it also stop the throbbing, glowing heads pursuing her? Would it send the faces of the unloved back to wherever they came from? Gasping loudly for breath, Carly Beth turned the corner and kept running. Glancing back, she could see her chattering pursuers turn with her, relentless and grinning. And then she remembered. She had a symbol of love. It was her head swan, the plaster of Paris, head her mother had sculpted of her. She remembered asking her mother why she had made it, and her mother had replied simply, "Why, because I love you." Why, maybe it could save her. Maybe it could pull her out of this nightmare. But where was it? She had tossed it aside earlier in the night, let it fall behind a hedge, left it in someone's yard without a second thought. Now that careless moment felt like a sentence. And then forward she recognized the street. She recognized the houses. This was where she had met up with Chuck and Steve. This was where she had sent them screaming into the dark. Her eyes darted frantically from yard to yard as behind her the heads swarmed together. Like buzzing bees, they bunched into a cluster, grinning now shootious, wet grins whins as they prepared to close in on her. "I've got to find the head," she told herself, struggling to breathe, struggling to keep her aching legs moving. "I've got to find my head." The rumbling, jabbering voices grew louder. The head swarmed closer. "Where? Where?" She screamed aloud. And then she saw it, the tall hedge across the street, the yard across the street. That was where she had let the beautiful head fall. Could she reach it before the ugly head swarmed over her? She had to try, sucking in a deep breath, her arms reaching out desperately in front of her. She turned and ran across the street. She dove behind the hedge, landing on her hands and knees, her chest heaving, her breath rasping, her head pounding. She reached for the plaster head. Her fingers swept the ground frantically, searching, grasping. It was gone. The head was gone. That single, devastating truth crashed over Carly Beth as she thrashed her hand blindly through the bottom of the hedge, fingers grasping at nothing. Her last chance, sweet only chance, sweet, had vanished. Still on her knees, heart hammering, she turned to face what was coming for her. The ghoulish heads rose up like a nightmare made solid, jabbering their mindless sounds, forming a wall of rot and glowing eyes that inched closer with every ragged breath she took. She scrambled to her feet, spinning desperately, searching for any escape route the darkness might offer. And then she saw it. There, caught between two upraised roots at the base of the big tree near the driveway, the plaster of Paris head stared up at her, thong pale and impossibly still amid all the chaos. The wind must have carried it there, she realized. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except reaching it. As the ugly heads bobbed and lurched closer, Carly Beth dove for the tree and seized the sculpted face with both hands. A cry of triumph tore from her throat. She wheeled around, thrusting the head high, turning its smooth, crafted features toward the jabbering mob. Go away, go away," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperate faith. "This is a symbol of love. Go away." For one trembling moment the heads stilled, their glowing eyes fixed on the sculpted face. They murmured amongst themselves, and Carly Beth felt the wild, fragile hope that she had found the answer to, and that love, shaped by a mother's hands, could be enough to drive back whatever hungry, dark thing these creatures were made of. But then wet smiles spread across their distorted lips, and the murmuring curdled into something else entirely. Low, scornful laughter rolled out of them like a wave. "Foon, go away," they mocked, throwing her own words back at her. And they moved Tweety quickly, deliberately, Foodie closing in from every side, eager to swallow her whole. Whatever power Carly Beth had believed that head possessed, the monsters weren't afraid of it, not even a little. The question hanging over everything now, cold and inescapable: what happens when the last desperate hope turns out to be no hope at all? The words echoed relentlessly through Carly Beth's mind. Too late for me. Her desperate plan had crumbled, and now the gruesome heads swarmed around her, their bulging eyes gleaming with triumph, their rumbling murmurs swelling into a roar. She felt herself being swallowed up in their foul, hot breath. Then, without thinking, she acted. She lowered the sculpted head through, the one her mother had made of her own face, and pulled it down hard over her hideous monster head. To her astonishment, it slid over her like a mask. "I'm wearing my own face like a mask," she thought bitterly. Darkness closed in. There were no eye holes. She couldn't see, she couldn't hear. Trapped in that tight, silent blackness, she could only feel her own terror, the pulse hammering at her temples, the throb of fear in her chest, the dry ache of her throat. What would the gruesome heads do to her? Would she become one of the unloved, condemned to a shelf in that horrible shop forever? She waited and waited. The silence was unbearable. Then, with a hard tug, she ripped the sculpted head away. Free, and the gruesome heads were gone, vanished. Every last one of them. Carly Beth stared straight ahead in pure disbelief, her eyes darting across the shadowy lawn, searching the trees and shrubs, squinting into the dark spaces between the houses. Nothing. They were simply gone. For a long moment she sat in the cold, wet grass, the sculpted head resting in her lap, breathing hard, staring across the silent, empty yards. Slowly her breathing returned to normal. She climbed to her feet. The wind had gentled, and the pale half-moon slipped out from behind the dark clouds that had swallowed it. Then something flapped against her throat, startled. She reached up and felt the bottom of the mask, hardly a gap between it and her neck. "Hey!" she cried aloud, heart leaping. She set the sculpted head gently down at her feet, raised both hands to the bottom of the mask, and pulled up. It came off easily. Just like that. Stunned, she held it in front of her, folding and unfolding it in her trembling hands. The orange eyes that had once glowed like fire had faded to nothing. The pointed animal fangs had gone rubbery and limp. "You're just a mask," she cried aloud. "Just a mask again," she laughed. She laughed, a wild, giddy, relieved laugh, eyed and tossed it up into the night air and caught it. The store owner had warned her. It can be removed only once, only by a symbol of love. Well, she had done it. She had actually done it, and she would never, never put it on again. Exhaustion crashed over her all at once. Most of the houses were dark now, the streets empty, every last trick-or-treater long gone home. She bent, picked up the sculpted head, and carrying both it and the limp mask, she started walking quickly toward her house. She stopped halfway up the driveway. She reached up and touched her face with one hand, running her fingers over her cheeks, across her nose. Was her old face back? Did she look like herself again? She couldn't tell just by touch. "I've got to get to a mirror," she exclaimed, and she ran the rest of the way to the front door and rang the bell. After a few seconds, Noah swung it open and pushed out the storm door. His eyes traveled up to her face 20, and he began to scream. "Take off that mask. Take it off. You're so ugly." And just like that, the night's greatest horror wasn't the gruesome heads, or the dark shop, or the monster she had become. It was those words, coming from her own little brother, leaving Carly Beth standing on her own doorstep, desperately hoping, super ensuring, that she still had a face worth coming home to. For one terrible, heart-stopping moment, Carly Beth was convinced the mask had stolen her face forever. She shoved past her brother, flung the horrible thing aside, and bolted for the hallway mirror, dreading what she might find staring back at her. But there she was, perfectly, wonderfully, gloriously herself. Dark brown eyes, broad forehead. That little snip of a nose she had always wished was longer. She made herself a silent promise right then and there. She would never complain about that nose again, not once, not ever. And then Noah started laughing. He stood in the doorway, shoulders shaking, barely able to get the words out. "It had been a joke," he said. Just a joke. He couldn't believe she had actually fallen for it. Carly Beth spun on him, furious, and told him in no uncertain terms that it had been no joke to her. But even her anger couldn't hold against the sheer, overwhelming relief flooding through her. She was home. Her face was her own. Everything was going to be fine. Her mother appeared at the end of the hall, arms crossed, eyebrows raised, wanting to know where Carly Beth had been for the past hour. and why she hadn't worn her duck costume, and why Sabrina had already called twice. Carly Beth could only grin chewing. The kind of grin she thought she might never stop wearing Shruti, and promised that it was sort of a long story, sort of a long, weird story. The kitchen was warm and bright and smelled of sweet hot cider, and Carly Beth had never in all her life been so glad to be home. She hugged her mother fiercely, settled onto a stool at the counter, and wrapped her hands around the steaming cup her mother set before her. Mrs. Caldwell leaned against the counter, chin resting in one hand, patient and waiting. "Go ahead," she said. "Talk." Carly Beth hesitated. Everything was fine now, she started to explain. Perfectly fine. But before she could say another word, Noah came crashing into the kitchen, his voice dropping into a deep and raspy growl, announcing himself with a question that made the warmth of the room suddenly feel a few degrees colder. He was wearing the mask.